Hey, all, this is Evan. I'm here with my plant. We call him George. So I saw this today and just thought about, what kind of keeping this plant has taught me about learning and development. So I actually got this as a gift from leading the Rare Future Leaders program this past cohort and have been, growing it slowly. So a couple things it's taught me is here's the too long didn't read version. When you're implementing, learning and development, professional development for your team, the three things you want to do is have consistency, make sure your teammates are in the right environment to grow now, and make sure in the future you move them to the right environment to grow. And I'm going to break all those down. And then two things you don't want to do from a learning and development perspective that this little plant here is teaching me is you don't want to neglect learning and development. You don't want to neglect professional development and training. And you also don't want to pull it up out of frustration because it's not growing fast enough. So let me break down all these thoughts and how this really applies from a, learning and development, professional development perspective. Is number one, consistency. What I've been learning from having a plant here is obviously the need to water consistently, to make sure it has light consistently, and to do it, to actually execute. And full transparency, I had led a prior cohort of future leaders. They got me a summer plant, didn't do the best job of taking care of it, and it didn't last too long. So I told myself this time I'm going to be more consistent. So I've been consistent, and thankfully I'm seeing a little bit of growth. You might be able to see he's got a couple little buds here going on that I'm looking forward to. Number two, you got to make sure with learning and development, you put your employees in the right environment now. So for me, I had to make sure that the plant here was in a place he could get appropriate sunlight, that the soil could stay moist, that he wasn't in the dark, that he wasn't around a heat source that was going to dry him out. So I had to make sure he was in the right place now. And same thing with your employees. You need to make sure they're in an environment where they have psychological safety, where they can learn from their mistakes and grow. You need to make sure they have opportunities to learn and grow at work and play to their strengths. And then number three, right environment in the future. So when I got this plant as a gift, he came in a little pot about this big, and his roots actually had started growing out. So I realized, he's already outgrowing that pot. I need to put him in a different, bigger pot where he can continue to grow. And then whenever it becomes springtime, we're going to move George outside and plant him where he can grow and the roots can expand even more. So the same thing's true of your employees. When they're starting to grow at work, even if they're in the same role, you need to give them more opportunities to use their strengths, more opportunities to grow, and realize what was satisfying for them this year might actually be containing or destructive to them in the future. So for example, if I would keep, George in this same pot forever, eventually the roots would have no place to go and he wouldn't be able to grow. He would eventually die because the roots wouldn't be able to dig down any deeper. Whereas if I plant him outside, then he's going to have room to grow and there's going to be that ability for growth. Same thing for your employees. There is going to come points where they might outgrow a role or the responsibilities of it. So as a leader and as an organization, always be looking and thinking growth for your people and take that interactive approach about it. And two things you don't want to do, as I said, is number one, neglect. It might seem simple, but with professional development, you need to execute. And a couple simple ways you can execute is when you have team meetings or one-on-ones, have somebody share what is something you learned this week, whether from an article, video, on-the-job work, and how are you applying what you learned at work? What are you going to start, stop, or continue doing based on what you learned at work? So just like I need to water this plant consistently for it to grow, you need to do consistent learning and development to grow. Just thinking about it or just talking about it, I could talk about needing to water George all day. And if I don't water him, he's not going to grow. But when I do water him consistently and I execute, you can see the growth. And I'm actually very proud we're getting a couple buds up here. Every day I see them getting a little bit bigger. And along with that, you can see them getting a little bit bigger. But what you don't want to do is pull things up before it's, too early. So what I mean by that is you don't want to pull up or switch course out of frustration. As an organization, you can always adjust, but I have seen organizations that put things like professional development in place, then something goes wrong or they adjust strategy and it's like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. And that's as crazy as if I would look at this plant right now and say, oh, you know what? It's not growing fast enough. I'm just going to pull it up and throw it away or neglect it or, I just need to discard it. It's not working. It's definitely not going to work if I pull it up. It's definitely not going to work if you pull it up and don't do any kind of professional development. So be patient with it. Be patient with your employees' growth. They will make mistakes at times. Obviously, you need to correct, manage, and adjust from that. But, keep them in those environments where you keep doing things like professional development, consistent small bites of learning that you talk about at team meetings, that you talk about at one-on-ones. And I keep doing this motion because it's just like that consistent watering. And just like a plant, I can't water this once. I can't dump a whole bucket of water or a whole tub of water on him one time and say, okay, George, you're watered. You're good to go for life. No. Because number one, he's not going to be able to absorb all that water, and too much might actually be detrimental because it's too much to take in. And number two, eventually he's going to need water again. So it has to be those consistent bites of learning. And that's the same thing with things like recognition, learning for your team, opportunities to grow, small, consistent over time, and just keep executing. But I promise if you do, you're going to see growth. Just like I'm seeing a little growth in my plant here, you're going to see even bigger growth, piece by piece, small bite by small bite with your employees. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Rare Future Leaders, I hope you definitely enjoyed this because you see plant growing. But I hope this was a good, little illustrative lesson for y'all that can be beneficial. So encourage you, invest in your learning and development, invest in your personal growth. Leaders, invest in your team's growth. Organizations, business owners, invest in your employees' growth. And small, consistent bites over time makes the big difference.